If a coworker misses a deadline, we might assume they're being lazy. If a customer snaps at us, we might think they're rude. And when someone else struggles at work, we often explain it in terms of their personality, their work ethic, their attitude, rather than something else. But when we miss a deadline, or we snap at someone, or we struggle at work, we often have a very different explanation. We were overloaded or under pressure. There were extenuating circumstances. We didn't have enough information. So why do we explain the same kind of behavior so differently depending on who's doing it? I'm Professor Bailey. I have a Ph.D. in organizational communication, and this is Everyday Organizational Behavior, a research-based series where we unpack the micro moments, relational dynamics, and people-driven forces that shape our work and life, often a lot more than we realize. Today, we're answering a deceptively simple question: why do we blame people instead of situations? The answer lies in how perception and attribution work, and in a couple of cognitive shortcuts that our brains make. Before we ever explain someone's behavior, we have to notice it, and that's where selective perception comes in. Selective perception means we don't all notice the same information in the same environment. Our attention is shaped by our goals, experiences, expectations, roles, and stress levels. So two people can observe the same situation and walk away with a very different interpretation of what happened. At work, this means we notice the behaviors that feel most relevant to us and miss others entirely. In a conversation, one person might focus on how something was said, tone, facial expressions, nonverbals, while another person is focused just on what was said. We might not notice our coworker was staying late all week. We might not realize a project was reprioritized behind the scenes. Selective perception shapes the evidence we're using, and once that evidence is filtered, the explanations that follow are already biased. Once we notice behavior, we usually try to explain it, and that is where we often commit the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error is our tendency to overemphasize a person's internal traits, like their personality or character, and underestimate situational factors when we're explaining behavior. In simple terms, when someone else messes up or struggles, we attribute it to who they are. This bias was first identified by social psychologist Lee Ross in 1977, and it shows up everywhere in organizational life. Managers assume poor performance reflects lack of effort rather than unclear expectations. Coworkers interpret stress as incompetence. Leaders see resistance as negativity instead of fear or overload. Situations are complex, invisible, and harder to imagine. Personality traits feel obvious and stable, so our brain defaults to personality-based explanations even when they're incomplete or wrong. So interestingly, this kind of misattribution is much less common when we're explaining our own behavior, and that's where self-serving bias comes in. We explain our own behavior. We tend to do the opposite. This pattern was identified by Dale Miller and Michael Ross in 1975. Self-serving bias means we attribute our successes to internal factors like skill, effort, and intelligence, and our failures to external ones like bad luck, time pressure, or unfair systems. So when we succeed, it's because we earned it. When we fail, it's because the circumstances got in the way. And this isn't because we're dishonest, it's because our brains are trying to protect some sense of competence and identity in ourselves. But when self-serving bias combines with the fundamental attribution error, it creates a serious double standard. We judge others by who they are and ourselves by what we're dealing with. So when we struggle or mess up, it's easier to shift the blame externally, but we don't always give other people that same benefit of the doubt. There's a concept that ties these patterns together, and it's called the actor-observer bias. Edward Jones and Richard Nisbett introduced the actor-observer bias in 1971 to describe how behavior looks different depending on whether we're the person acting or the person observing. When we're the actor, the situation feels obvious. When we're the observer, the person feels obvious. So from the inside, our behavior feels constrained, contextual, and reasonable, but from the outside, someone else's behavior looks intentional, stable, revealing. And this is why intent gets misread so easily at work. It's why emails escalate, why managers over-attribute performance issues to personality, and why conflict feels so personal so quickly, because we're all actors in our own story and observers in everybody else's. These aren't just abstract psychological concepts, they really shape real outcomes, affect who gets promoted and who gets labeled as difficult. They determine whether problems get fixed or if they're just blamed on individuals. When we default to blaming people instead of examining the situation, we're missing opportunities to redesign work and improve systems. Understanding these attribution biases doesn't mean we never hold people accountable. It means we slow down before assuming we already know why someone did what they did.